A mother's last hope in the grass, answered by the cowboy who refused to ride away. He almost didn't see her. That was the thing that would stay with him longest. Not what happened after, not the days that followed with all their weight and noise, but the particular nearness of almost. The way a man could be 6 inches from something that will change the rest of his life and ride right past it, and the only thing standing between him and that oblivion is the precise angle of afternoon light, or the way a horse tosses its head and slows for no particular reason, or the color of a woman's dress against the dry September grass. It was the color that stopped him. Blue, the particular washed-out blue of a garment that had once been something brighter and had faded in the sun over many washings and many years into the soft, patient blue of a morning sky in drought. He had been riding the flat ground south of the Cimarron, with his hat brim down against the 4 o'clock glare, half his mind on the next water, and half on nothing at all, when the roan slowed and lifted its head, and he followed its attention to the left and found the colour in the grass. He pulled up. A woman was lying in the tall yellow grass, 20 yards from the road, on her side, with one arm extended in front of her, in the particular reaching posture of someone who has been crawling and has not been able to continue. She was not moving. The grass around her was undisturbed in a wide circle. She had been there long enough for the grass to settle back around her, long enough for the afternoon to advance past her without noticing. He was off the horse before he had decided to get off the horse. He crossed the grass in long strides, and he crouched beside her, and he put 2 fingers to her throat, and she was alive, pulse thin but present, like a thread pulled nearly to snapping. And he turned her gently and saw her face and recalibrated everything. She was young, 25 perhaps younger, but aged by something beyond years, the way sun and hardship age a face faster than time, writing lines in the skin that belong to someone older. Dark hair, tangled with grass seed, a cut above one eyebrow, dried to brown. Her lips were cracked with what was almost certainly dehydration, and the hand that had been reaching was scraped raw, as if she had crawled some distance before the grass. Her breathing was shallow but regular, and in the crook of her other arm, the arm folded beneath her, the arm he had not seen until he turned her, a child, a girl, 3 years old, perhaps 4, pressed against her mother's chest with both small fists bunched in the blue fabric, eyes open, watching him with the enormous wordless attention of a child who is old enough to understand that something is very wrong and young enough to have no frame for what that means. She did not cry. She did not make any sound at all. She simply looked at him with those dark, serious eyes and held on to her mother. The sight hit him somewhere below the rib cage. He sat back on his heels and looked at them both, at the woman's shallow breathing and the child's silent vigil. And he pressed one hand over his mouth, and he breathed through it. He had spent enough time in enough difficult situations to have learned the value of taking 5 seconds before acting, of understanding what you were dealing with before you reached for any particular solution. He took those 5 seconds now. The woman needed water and shade and rest and probably a doctor, in roughly that order. The child needed her mother to be all right. The nearest town was Dalton Creek, 18 miles south. The nearest homestead, he thought, running the geography he'd mapped over 2 days of riding this territory, was the Reese place, maybe 8 miles back the way he'd come, which meant 8 miles north and then 18 miles south equaled a very sick woman and a shrinking window. He looked at the sky. He looked at the road. He looked at the woman's face. He did not look toward the south end of the road, toward the horizon he had been riding for, toward the job in Dalton Creek that was expecting him in 2 days and paying enough to clear the debt he had been carrying since the bad winter 3 years back. He did not look that direction because he already knew it didn't matter. His name was Thomas Halsey, and he was 31 years old, and he had been cowhand, a scout, a fence builder, a cattle driver, and several other things that the frontier required in its constant and unsentimental demand for labor. He had no family that he knew the location of. He had a horse, a bedroll, a rifle, a good knife, $43 in a leather pouch, and a contract waiting in Dalton Creek for a man willing to ride the eastern boundary of a ranch for 6 weeks and report on fence breaks and water sources. He looked at the child. The child looked back at him. He got up and went to the roan and retrieved his canteen, and he came back and he lifted the woman's head carefully and brought the canteen to her lips, and she responded, the body responding before the mind, the deep animal insistence of survival answering before consciousness could. And she swallowed, and her eyelids moved, and her fingers, which had been loose, tightened against the child. Then her eyes opened. She saw him, and in the first clear second before either of them had spoken a word, he saw in her face the full story of a person who has stopped expecting help and has been wrong, and the complicated, fragile thing that happens when that expectation is overturned. The collision of relief and fear, and something that might have been, in another woman, in another situation, tears, but in her presented simply as a long, ragged breath that said everything. "My daughter," she said. Her voice was a dry husk of itself. "She needs—" "She's here," Thomas said. "She's all right. She's right here." The woman's eyes found the child, and the child pressed closer, and the woman's arm tightened around her, and Thomas sat back in the grass with the canteen in his hands, and gave them a moment that was not his to occupy. Then she tried to sit up, and her face went white, and he said, "Don't," and she stopped. "What happened?" he said. She looked at the road. She looked at the direction she had come from. Then she looked at him, and in her eyes, before she could compose what to say, he saw something that was not just exhaustion and dehydration. Something had chased her here. "How far back?" he said. She closed her eyes. "Not far enough," she said. Her name was Marin Doyle, and the child was Lily, and the story came out in the careful, rationed way that a person tells a story when they are deciding, even as they speak, how much of it to give away. Thomas did not push. He had learned, from long experience of people in difficult situations, that pushing produced a performance rather than the truth, and what he needed was the truth. He gave her water in small amounts while her system remembered how to receive it, and he held Lily while Marin collected herself, and Lily allowed this with the stoic practicality of a child who has learned to read whether an adult can be trusted and has made her assessment. The short version was this. Maren's husband, a man named Cole Doyle, had been dead 6 weeks, kicked by a horse, which was the kind of death the frontier dealt with particular indifference, ordinary and final and without narrative weight. He had left her a small farm 12 miles north on the Cimarron's eastern edge, 40 acres of difficult ground but hers, with a deed and a clear title. He had also, in the pragmatic tradition of men who anticipated their own absence, left her a debt to a man named Garrison Pruitt. Not the Pruitt from any previous reckoning, but this particular Pruitt, who ran a supply operation out of Dalton Creek and had a habit of extending credit to settlers at terms that looked generous until a man died and left a widow, and Pruitt appeared with a revised calculation. Pruitt had appeared 3 days after Cole's funeral. He wanted the farm. Maren had said no. Pruitt had given her 2 weeks to reconsider. The 2 weeks had passed yesterday, and yesterday afternoon 2 men Pruitt employed had arrived at the farm and communicated, without particular drama, simply as a statement of the way things were, that she had, until the next morning, to leave. When she had refused, they had communicated this more directly, and she had taken Lily through the back and run. They had followed. She had spent the night in a gully, and the next morning in the grass. And by the time Thomas Halse's roan had slowed, and he had followed its attention to the colour blue in the dry September grass, she had been lying in that grass for 5 hours. Thomas listened to all of it. Then he was quiet for a long time, which was not the absence of a response, but the presence of one forming. "The deed," he said. "Do you have it with you?" She looked at him. She reached inside the collar of the blue dress and withdrew a folded document pressed flat against her skin, slightly damp, entirely intact. "My husband told me never to leave it in the house," she said. Thomas looked at the deed without touching it. "Then the farm is yours," he said. "Whatever Pruitt's paper says, if the deed is clear and dated prior—" "I know it's mine," she said, and her voice carried something brief and sharp. "Knowing a thing is yours and keeping it are different problems when you're a woman alone." He held her gaze, and he did not argue with this because it was a thing he could not argue with. It was simply true, and he had enough honesty in him to sit with a truth that offered no comfortable exit. He had his horse. He had his canteen. He had $43 and a knife and a rifle and a contract in Dalton Creek waiting on a man who had not yet arrived. He had Pruitt's 2 men somewhere to the north, 12 miles back, who were either at the farm or on the road, looking. He had a sick woman who could not ride hard and a child who could not ride at all. He looked at Lily. Lily was eating a piece of hardtack he had given her from his pack, with the full concentration of a small person for whom food is currently the most important thing in the world. She had the look of her mother in the jaw, that particular quality of quiet determination, the refusal to perform distress. And it was that resemblance, in that moment, that settled something in Thomas Halsey's chest. "I'm going to take you both to Dalton Creek," he said. "There's a magistrate there, a real one. I've done work for the county before. I know the name. You present that deed in front of a magistrate, and Pruitt's paper is worth nothing." Maren looked at the road. 18 miles. "Yes. I can't ride hard." "I know we won't." She looked at him with the calculating attention he was beginning to recognize as her primary mode of engaging with the world. "Why are you doing this?" she said. It was the same question he had been asked before, and he found that he had the same fundamental answer, though he arranged it differently. "Because I can," he said. And the fact of being able to do something and choosing not to do it, I've made my peace with a lot of things. That one I haven't. She studied him a moment longer. Then she said, "Help me up." He did. They were 2 miles down the south road, with Lily in front of Thomas on the roan, and Maren riding behind him with her arms around his waist and her forehead against his back, when he heard them. Not close, not yet. But from the north, unmistakably distinctly, the sound of 2 horses moving at a pace that was not casual, not the pace of men who had lost their quarry, the pace of men who had found a trail. Thomas felt Maren's arms tighten. He looked at the road ahead, flat, open, offering nothing in the way of cover for another mile. He looked at the sky, the position of the sun. He did the mathematics. The mathematics did not favor them. The land along the South Cimarron did not believe in cover. That was the problem laid out in plain geology: flat ground, short grass, the occasional cottonwood standing alone and exposed along the dry creek beds, the kind of landscape that was honest in its refusal to help you. A man could see 4 miles in any direction without obstruction, which was useful if you were the kind of person who wanted to see what was coming, and ruinous if you were the kind of person who wanted to not be seen. Thomas Hulse was the second kind of person right now. The cottonwood, he found, was not ideal. It stood 30 yards off the road in the bed of a dry creek. The bank cut 6 feet down into the earth, the tree growing from the bottom, wide enough to break a silhouette if you were looking from the north and the light was behind you. He got the roan down into the creek bed, and he helped Maren down after, and he put Lily in the hollow at the base of the cottonwood's roots with a piece of pemmican from his pack, and he looked at her with the serious, direct attention he would have given an adult. "You need to be very quiet," he said, "like a mouse in its hole." Lily looked at him with those enormous dark eyes. She took the pemmican. She nodded once. He turned to Maren. She already had the rifle. She had taken it from the saddle scabbard without being told, with the ease of a woman who had grown up with firearms rather than being introduced to them in adulthood. She was checking the load with practiced hands, and Thomas noted this and recalibrated his understanding of her. "You know how to use that," he said. "My father ran a homestead in the Panhandle," she said. "I was shooting prairie dogs at 100 yards before I was 12. She looked up at him. "Don't look so surprised. Women bury their husbands and then they manage." He had nothing to say to that, so he said nothing. He took his revolver and went to the edge of the creek bank and looked north. They were visible now, 2 riders a mile back coming at a long trot that ate the distance steadily. One large, one lean. He had the impression of men who had been described to him by their type rather than their faces, which was the type of man that Pruitt would employ. Large enough to be useful, unspecific enough to be deniable. He watched them come and did his measuring. They were following the road. That was either discipline or habit. Men who tracked following the trail rather than the instinct. If they continued on the road, they would pass the dry creek bed at 30 yards. If they were good, and Pruitt's consistent employment of them suggested they were at least competent. They would be looking at the grass beside the road for sign. The roan's tracks in the dry grass were clear. He had perhaps 2 minutes. He went back down into the creek bed. "They're following the road," he said low. "They may pass us, they may not." Marin's jaw was set. Her hands on the rifle were steady. "And if they don't?" Thomas looked at the root hollow where Lily sat, with her pemmican. He looked at Marin. He looked at the grade of the creek bank and the angle of the tree and the position of the sun. "Then we have a conversation," he said. "Those men don't have conversations," Marin said, and her voice had the flat certainty of someone stating a fact they know from experience rather than inference. He looked at her. She looked at him. "When they came to the farm," she said, "the bigger one, he had a brand on his hand. Here." She touched the web between her own thumb and forefinger. "A circle with a line through it. It's Pruitt's mark. He puts it on everything he owns." A pause. "He puts it on men too, if they stay long enough." She looked at the bank. "They won't talk, Thomas. They'll take Lily, and they'll send me back. And Pruitt will make a problem out of you, and the deed will end up in a fire somewhere." He heard his name in her mouth, and it landed with a small, particular weight. She had not used it before. He sat with what she had said. He did not attempt to smooth its edges. He knew she was right in the fundamental assessment. Men who wore a man's mark on their hands were past the point where conversation solved things, and his choices were narrowing with every second the hoofbeats came closer. He could ride, give the roan its head, cut south across the open ground at full speed with Marin and Lily on board. The roan was a good horse, but not faster than 2 unburdened horses over 18 miles of flat ground. He could fight. 2 rifles in a covered position, creek bank providing elevation, the advantage of choice of moment. But Lily was here, and a fight with a child 3 feet away from the shooting was a fight he could not control, no matter how good he was. Or he could do the third thing, the thing that had come to him 20 seconds ago and which he had been examining from various angles ever since, looking for the flaw in it. He turned to Marin. "Give me the rifle," he said. She looked at him. "Give me the rifle and take the roan and go south with Lily. Ride easy, don't gallop. Ride easy and low and get into the tall grass on the west side of the road, 400 yards down." "Stay there." Her eyes narrowed. "And you?" "I'm going to go up on the road and talk to them." "I just told you. I know what you told me." He looked at her steadily. "I'm not going to stop them with words. I'm going to stop them with the 2 minutes it takes for me to be wrong about what I thought I could stop with words, during which time you will be far enough south that when they get past me—" Her face changed. "Thomas, when they get past me, they will still be 18 miles from Dalton Creek, and you will have enough of a lead that you can get there. Get to a man named Carver, federal magistrate. He keeps an office above the Land Records building. Show him the deed. Tell him everything." He paused. "Tell him Jesse Kane sent you if you want a door to open faster." He pulled a card from his inside pocket, a small plain card with a name and the words "Surveying and County Work," and pressed it into her hand. "He'll know that name." Marin looked at the card. She looked at him. Her eyes were dry, but the expression in them was not the expression of a woman who felt nothing. "This isn't your problem," she said. Her voice was low and tight and barely controlled. "You stopped on a road. You gave us water. You don't owe—" "I know," he said. He took the rifle gently from her hands. She held on for 1 second. Then she let go. He helped her up onto the roan, and he put Lily in her arms, and he watched them go south, easy, low, the blue dress flat against the roan's flank, Lily's face turned back toward him over her mother's shoulder with those enormous dark eyes. He held the look for 1 moment. He lifted one hand. He turned to the creek bank. Above him, the hoofbeats were close enough now that he could feel the ground conduct them, and he climbed up to the road and stood in the full, flat light of 4 o'clock in September and waited for what was coming. He was one man with 2 firearms and no cover, and 18 miles between a mother and safety, and the only currency he had was time. He intended to spend it. The bigger man was named Cal, and the lean one went by Rue. Thomas knew this because Cal said it. "Rue, hold up." When they pulled their horses to a stop in front of him, which was the kind of small, normalizing detail that arrived in dangerous situations unbidden, the ordinary machinery of human beings running beneath the extraordinary weight of the moment. Thomas stood in the road with the rifle across his body, not raised, not threatening, but present, and he looked at them with the particular stillness that he had learned was the most unsettling thing a man could offer another man who was expecting fear. Cal was wide-shouldered, red-faced, with the kind of permanent sunburn that belonged to outdoor labor rather than outdoor leisure. He had a brand on his hand, exactly where Maren said, and he wore a revolver with the familiar ease of a man who has drawn it enough times that it no longer requires thought. He looked at Thomas with the professional assessment of a man deciding how much trouble this represented. Rue was thinner, quieter, harder to read. He hung slightly back. His eyes went to the south road, checking, and Thomas watched them go. "You see a woman and a child?" Cal said, not aggressive, practical. "I see a lot of things," Thomas said. "Long road down here." Cal looked at the road. He looked at the grass. He looked at Thomas. "You got a horse," he said, noting the absence of it. "I do," Thomas said. "Sent her south with my supplies earlier. I prefer walking in the afternoon." Cal's eyes went south again, then back to Thomas. "We're not here for you," Cal said. "We're looking for a woman named Doyle and her child. She's got property that's owed to our employer, and she's—" "Run away," Thomas said mildly. Cal looked at him. "That's the word you were working toward," Thomas said. "She ran away." From 2 men who came to her farm 6 weeks after her husband died and told her she was losing her land. He kept his voice the same, even temperature throughout, neither rising nor cooling. "I'm going to guess that Pruitt's paper is dated after the deed. I'm going to guess that the debt calculation is not what Cole Doyle was told it was when he signed it. And I'm going to guess that if a federal magistrate looked at Pruitt's full operation, the Doyle situation would not be the most interesting document in the pile." Rue moved his horse a step to the right, and Thomas tracked it without moving the rifle. "Son," Cal said, and the word was not unkind. It had the quality of a warning given because the speaker was underneath everything, not a man who wanted this to be worse than it had to be. Move off the road. Thomas looked at him. I spent 7 years, Thomas said, riding for other men. Did what I was told, kept my head down. I watched things happen on those 7 years that I kept my head down for. And I told myself that it wasn't my ground, it wasn't my cattle, it wasn't my decision to make. He paused. You know what I found out? The keeping your head down, it doesn't get lighter. It accumulates. He looked at Cal directly. I'm not moving off the road. Cal put his hand on his revolver. Thomas raised the rifle. The road went entirely silent. The afternoon light was horizontal now, red gold and flat, and it lit the three of them in that stillness as if they were posed for something. A painting, a photograph, the final frame of a scene that everyone present knew could only resolve in one of two ways. Rue spoke. Cal. The word was quiet. Something in it. Cal looked at him. Man's got the rifle up, Rue said. He's got the high hand. He's one man. He's one man with a rifle up and nothing to lose, Rue said, and his voice was the voice of a man doing a very fast, very honest accounting, and we're two men with better odds and a different errand. He looked at Thomas, then back at Cal. Pruitt pays for results. He doesn't pay for funerals. Something moved across Cal's face. It was not conscience exactly, not in the way a philosopher would use the word, but it was the near neighbor of it, the practical version, the recognition that a thing was not worth what it would cost. He took his hand off the revolver. He looked at Thomas for a long moment, a look that was not friendly, but that held, somewhere in its depths, the small and unspoken acknowledgment of one man to another that certain positions, taken clearly and at cost, deserved to be noted. Then he looked at Rue. Then he turned his horse. They rode north. Thomas stood in the road and watched them go until they were small and then smaller, and then the horizon took them. And then he stood a moment longer in the silence of the road, just the wind and the grass and his own breathing, and he let the tension leave his body the way water leaves a wrung cloth, slowly, completely, leaving something emptied. He looked south. He began to walk. He found them exactly where he had told Maren to go. She heard him coming before she saw him, and by the time he reached the tall grass on the west side of the road, she was standing with the expression of a woman who has been holding something enormous in both arms for a long time, and is not yet willing to set it down until she has confirmed it is safe to do so. She looked at him, at both hands, at the absence of blood at his face. They turned back, he said. She sat down in the grass. Not dramatically, not the collapse of a person overwhelmed. She simply sat, cross-legged, the way a person sits, when the muscles that have been holding everything together have been given permission to rest. Lily climbed immediately into her lap, and Maren put both arms around her and held her. And Thomas stood a few feet away and looked at the sky and gave them that time. Then he sat too. They sat in the tall grass with the roan nearby, and the October light going had amber and long across everything, and after a while Lily fell asleep in her mother's arms with the immediate, uncomplicated totality of very young children, and the silence around the three of them became the kind of silence that contains more than it withholds. He used to bring her flowers, Maren said quietly. Not to Thomas exactly, to the air, to the cooling afternoon. Coal. He wasn't a man for sentiment. He didn't believe in making a thing out of thing. But he would ride back from town with wildflowers in his saddle bag. He never mentioned it. He'd just set them on the table. She looked at Lily's sleeping face. She'd get so excited every time, like it was the first time. Thomas said nothing. He was a good man, Maren said. Not a complicated thing to say, but true. She looked at the grass. The world is not particularly organized around rewarding good men. No, Thomas said. It isn't. She looked at him then, full, direct, without the calculation. Or rather, with the calculation finished, the assessment made, the answer recorded. She reached into the collar of the blue dress and withdrew the deed again. She held it for a moment. Then she held it out to him. He looked at it. He didn't take it. "What's that for?" he said. "I want someone else to hold it," she said. "For the next 18 miles. I've been holding it against my chest for 3 days, and I want someone else to carry it for a while." He understood this was not about the document. He took the deed. He folded it carefully and put it in his inside pocket against his chest, where a pocket watch had once lived. Lily shifted in her sleep and made a small, contented sound, and the evening came down around the three of them in the grass, quiet and enormous and briefly, improbably, safe. They rode into Dalton Creek the following morning. Not dramatically. The frontier rarely arranged its arrivals for drama, preferring instead the mundane delivery of exhausted people and tired horses into the undistinguished dust of a main street. Thomas had Lily in front of him on the roan. Maren rode behind. They had camped the night in a draw 3 miles north of town, and the camping had been quiet in the way of people who have been through something together and have arrived at the particular ease that follows shared ordeal. Not comfort exactly, but the absence of the performance that precedes it. Lily had woken at dawn and looked at the sunrise with the same serious attention she gave everything, and then had asked Thomas without preamble what his horse's name was. He had told her, Pickett. She had considered this. "That's a good name," she said. He had agreed that it was. Carver's office was above the Land Records building, as Thomas had said. The magistrate himself was a compact, careful man with reading spectacles and the manner of someone who had been appointed to his position because he was genuinely interested in the function of law in a place that frequently tested that interest. He received them without ceremony, which was its own kind of respect. And he read the deed and the letter and the documentation with the unhurried precision of a man who understood that the cost of haste in his office was paid by the people sitting across the desk from him. He read Pruitt's document last. He looked at it for a long time. "Where did you get this?" I said. "Draper," Thomas said, "in Redbone. He was running a proceeding before I arrived." He set Carver's card on the desk. "You know my work." Carver looked at the card. He looked at Thomas. "Boundary surveys and range reports," he said. "You've done 3 jobs for this county." "4," Thomas said. Carver looked at the deed again. "The notary seal on Pruitt's document is fraudulent," he said. He said it the way a man says a thing that confirms what he already suspected. "I have seen this particular fraudulent seal before. It is associated with a filing agent in Clayton who has been operating under assumed credentials for approximately 2 years. He removed his spectacles. "I have been waiting for the right case, to use as the foundation for a formal complaint. He looked at Maren. "Mrs. Doyle, I want you to understand that what I'm about to do will take some weeks to complete formally, but I can issue an injunction today that will prevent any further action against your property pending resolution." He paused. "And I want you to understand that the resolution, in my assessment, will be in your favor." Maren sat very straight in the chair across from his desk. She had Lily in her lap. Lily was looking at Carver's spectacles with deep interest. "I understand," Maren said. Carver opened his desk drawer. He took out a form. He dipped his pen. Thomas watched him write and felt, somewhere in his chest, the particular satisfaction of a thing being done correctly. Not the loud satisfaction of a won fight, but the quiet, substantial satisfaction of a mechanism working the way it was built to work, when someone had been patient enough to find the right gear to turn. The injunction was filed before noon. A copy was dispatched to Redbone by the county rider, a fact that Pruitt would receive, Thomas estimated, by Thursday afternoon, which was roughly the same time that Carver's formal complaint about the fraudulent notary seal would begin its administrative journey through the territorial system. Pruitt was not a stupid man. Thomas assumed he would calculate the trajectory of this situation and make decisions accordingly. Men like Pruitt had exits prepared. They usually took them. Cal and Rue, Thomas expected, would find different employment. He hoped, in the particular way that people hope for specific things about specific people after brief and meaningful contact, that Rue would find something that did not require him to intimidate widows. He had the feeling that Rue, given different circumstances and different choices presented at the right moments, might have been something other than what he was. That was a hope without a foundation, but he held it anyway. He stayed in Dalton Creek 3 days. He told himself it was to make the statement Carver needed about the events in Redbone and the road south of Cimarron, which was true. He also arranged the contract conversation with the ranch that had been expecting him, which was a shorter and more honest conversation than he'd expected. The rancher, a practical man named Hollis, extended the start date by 2 weeks without difficulty, because range surveys did not expire on the kind of schedule that required a man to fail someone in a ditch in order to meet them. He spent part of the 3 days at the boarding house where Maren and Lily were staying, in the way of someone who has no particular agenda but finds that the direction his feet take him at the end of a day has its own logic. On the second evening, Lily dragged him outside to show him a moth she had found on the boarding house porch. Enormous, pale green, resting on the wooden rail with its wings spread in the lamplight. She was whispering, in the way children whisper when they are afraid of disturbing something beautiful. He crouched beside her and looked at it. "What is it?" she whispered. "A lunar moth," he said, equally quiet. "Is it lost?" He thought about this. "I don't think moths get lost," he said. "I think they go where the light is." Lily considered this with great seriousness. Then she nodded, as if this were the correct answer to a question she had been keeping. He looked up, and Maren was in the doorway behind them, watching, and the lamplight from inside made a shape of her in the frame, and her face had in it the expression of a person who has arrived after a long and difficult journey at a place that might in time become a direction rather than a destination. He rode out on the fourth morning. Marin and Lily came to the livery to see him off, which he had not expected, and which required him to examine the floorboards of the livery for longer than was strictly necessary while he adjusted Picket's girth. Lily gave him a rock. It was an ordinary rock, flat, grey, unremarkable, that she had apparently selected during their time in Dalton Creek for reasons that were entirely her own. She pressed it into his hand with both of hers and looked at him. "So you remember?" she said. He closed his fingers around it. He looked at Marin. She was looking at him with the full, direct, unguarded attention that was her rarest expression. The one behind all the others. The one that lived beneath the calculation and the endurance and the determined self-sufficiency of a woman who had learned to need nothing as a survival strategy. She was not performing anything. She was simply standing in a livery doorway in the September morning, watching him and letting him see that she was watching. "Come back through," she said, "when the survey is done." It was not a question. It was not a demand. It was an offering, small, deliberate, placed on the table between them with a care that acknowledged everything it was risking. He looked at her. "The survey takes 6 weeks, he said. "I know," she said. He put the rock in his breast pocket beside the deed he was returning to her. He held it out, and she took it, and for a moment both their hands were on it. He let go. He mounted Pickett. He looked at them both, Marin and Lily, standing in the livery door, the morning light coming long and clean across the Dalton Creek main street, the ordinary dust of the world settling around them in the particular stillness of a moment that is not dramatic, but that carries everything. He touched the brim of his hat. He rode east. 6 weeks and 4 days later he came back through. The farm north of the Cimarron had a new fence line along the eastern edge, not his work, but good work. The posts set deep and true, the wire tight. The injunction had held. Pruitt's formal complaint had proceeded through the territorial system and arrived, as Carver had predicted, in Pruitt's favor, in the way that matters least and most simultaneously, not in prison, but finished. The operation in Clayton had been dissolved. The fraudulent seal had been retired. None of this made the world fair. It made this particular corner of it, for the moment, slightly less unfair, which was the honest measure of what good procedure could accomplish. Lily saw him coming down the road from the top of the fence post she had been sitting on, which she was not supposed to be doing. She screamed his name, and Pickett's name separately with equal emphasis, and she jumped down from the post and ran toward him across the brown grass, and he swung down and caught her before she reached the horse, which startled easily, and he held her up at arm's length while she gripped his hands and laughed. Marin came out of the house. She crossed the yard without hurrying, with the particular unhurried movement of someone who has decided they are allowed to arrive at a thing without performing urgency. She stopped a few feet away. He set Lily down and looked at Marin. She looked at him. There was a long moment of nothing, of October air and dry grass smell and the sound of Pickett moving in the road behind him. "You came back," she said. "I said I would," he said. She looked at him for another moment. Then she turned toward the house. "Come in," she said. "The coffee's on." He tied Pickett to the post and followed her. Behind him the road curved north toward the Cimarron and south toward Dalton Creek, and in every direction toward the enormous, indifferent, ongoing business of the frontier. The cattle drives, and the county courts, and the men with gavels, and the men with brands on their hands, and all the small and daily negotiations between what the world was and what people needed it to be. The door to the farmhouse closed. The October light came down across the new fence line, straight and true, and quietly marking what was hers. And the grass bent in the wind, the way grass does, patient and continuous, and oblivious to the small, enormous weight of what had just walked through that door. And the road lay empty, and the world continued. And somewhere inside, a child was already telling a horse's name to someone who already knew it, and laughing. "End!"